Okay. So yesterday, what we were seeing was that there's like what I described as sort of like a tension between the individual's rights and the rights of the neighbors when it comes to shared spaces and allowing more foot traffic to come in and out of the neighborhood. We saw two different opinions. We saw the opinion of the Rambam that a neighbor has a right to stop a person from taking in new tenants. Um, and then we saw a second opinion from other Rishonim that a neighbor doesn't have a right to stop a person from taking in new tenants. Everyone agrees that if these are good morning, that if these are additional dependents that are sitting, eating at his table, quite literally, then you don't have a power to stop a person from taking in family members. But tenants is a machlokes between the Rishonim. Um, and then we saw that everyone would agree that you don't have a right to add new doors into that open up into a chutzner, into a shared area, because the increase of doors variably results in a changed use of that shared area. So those are the two things that we focused on yesterday. Now let's take a look at Sif Gimel. And he says, Velo Ode. He says, I'll go even further. He says, Ela afilu haya petach o chalon shel echad mehashutfim b'hachatzer katan. That if, let's say, there was a door or window of one of the neighbors that was a small window that opened up into this shared area. Eno yachol laharchivo. The No one has a right to enlarge the window that opens up into this shared area. And why don't I have a right to enlarge the window? Plug in my power because I'm almost low on juice. Why don't I have the power? He says, Shaharei Shutfa Omer Lo, Bapetzach Katan Ani Yachol Lihisater Mimcha Bishat Tashmish Be'achatzer, Ve'eni Yachol Lihisater Mimcha Bepetach Gadol. He says, because the other neighbor can say to him, it's one thing for you to have a small window that opens up into this courtyard. So when I'm doing the laundry and I'm hanging things up on the clothesline or whatever else I'm doing in that courtyard, that's our shared space, I do feel a sense of privacy. But now that you've expanded this window so that everything that I do out in this courtyard is constantly being scrutinized by you, it inhibits my ability to operate freely. And I want to do certain things that I don't want you to see. So, for example, if a woman could say I'm in my bathrobe when I'm hanging up the laundry on the clothesline, it's embarrassing for me for you to be standing there with your coffee at the kitchen, just watching me hanging up the laundry. It makes me uncomfortable. It creeps me out. Vimhaya hapesach gadol lo ya'asenu shnayim ketanim. Afilu lo haya rechavam yoser mehapesach ha'echas. And then he goes even further. And he says, let's say a doorway. Let's say a neighbor wants to convert a large doorway into two smaller doors. Does he have a right to do that? So you're not changing the footprint of the door, but you're just converting it from one door to two. He says you shouldn't do that. Sheyesh ata shaharei hashutuf omer lo bepetach echad ani yachol lihisater mimcha kishehi neula the derech hapetach liot liprakim neula. The argument of the neighbor could be is that when there's one door, then there's a greater likelihood that, let's say, a certain percentage of the time that door will be locked. But now that you have two doors and there's additional ability, maybe let's say I've divided the inside of my house so that half of the door now goes for one tenant and half of the door goes for another tenant. He says that's also problematic because now there's additional foot traffic in and out of the chutzner. V'cheinim hayu lo shnei psachim ketanim shel shnei amos, enu yachol lasos pesach echad shel dalet amos. And he says, and then the converse is also true. In other words, any kind of change that's made to the access ways in and out of the chutzner can be stopped by the neighbor. He says, because even if you have two small doors and you want it that are 2 amos wide each, and you want to convert it into one large door, that's also problematic. He says, because the neighbor could say, when people look out of a narrow door, they don't see as much as when they look out of a wide door. Okay, aval im hayalo petach patuach lechatzer b'shtei delatot, v'rotze la'asoto delat echat, yesh mi she'omer she'en yicholim la'akev alav, afal pi sheniftach kulo tamid, ma she'eno kein k'shahita b'shtei delatot. He says, if a person has a doorway, and that doorway is usually closed by 2 doors. In other words, it's a I guess, I don't know, there must be, I'm sure there's a name for it. I don't know if that's not, is that French doors? Maybe. So you open it like that, and now he wants to replace the French doors with just one solid door. He says that you can't stop a person. He says, even though you could theoretically argue that, when you have French doors, maybe you only open up one of them, and now you're going to open up this whole wide door. He says that's already too much of a stretch. He says, because since you're not changing the inherent structure of the doorway, you can do whatever you want. And the guy could always open up to the 2 French doors. So what difference does it make? And some also hold that you are allowed to convert 2 small doors into one large door if there are 2 adjacent doors. Because it really doesn't make a difference. Okay, I'm just going to run through it. Okay, I'm going to skip to the next sif, okay? From all of this, we can apply a logical argument. That if one of the neighbors, in courtyard A, has purchased a house in courtyard B, he doesn't have a right to open up his door of the new house into the old house. In other words, let's say he wants to maybe, let's see, vafilu mirtza listom hapetach shebechatzer acheret, vafilu kana rishus mi bale hachatzer liftoch od petach mi beito shebechatzer hashutvus, v'yirtza lahachlif al habayit shebechatzer hacheres enu yochel. He says you're not allowed to do a construction project such that you'll have in your house, I guess that's in an adjacent courtyard, to open up to the old courtyard. That you're not allowed to do. So we'll skip that as well. Basically, we get the gist of what he's saying. And Sif Hay says, Kol mashin yispor zedavka keshekanu chatzer b'shutvus ubayis l'chol echad v'nisratzu ladur kamoshuhu. He says everything that we've set up until now is when 2 neighbors purchased individual homes and originally came to the understanding that they would share the chutzner space, a shared space. Da'az asurim l'shanot b'ptachim. Then they're not allowed to change the configuration of the doors. V'chol mashen isbar, v'kol shkein im yarshu kain, o shebina'u al menas kain. And that's certainly true if they inherited these homes or they built the homes from scratch with this condition אבל אם באיש שקנו נסרצו שכל אחד יעשה לו איזה שינו בבניינו כפי צרכיו או כפי מנהג המקום, but if the neighbors come to an agreement, I give you permission to do whatever modifications to your home that you want, as far as what your needs are. Or if, let's say, there's an existing minhag hamakom, meaning that there are municipal laws in place that are more liberal than this halacha, af sha'avar zman rav v'lo asa, lo amrinan demochal. Then even if much time has elapsed, we don't assume that a person has given up his rights to make those modifications. De'ein shum raya al mechilato, de'ein derech limchol al tzirachav, because people don't usually give up their rights to do whatever modifications they want. And each neighbor therefore can do whatever he wants if there was already that agreement or the municipality allows it. Um, and neither neighbor can protest. And similarly, if the neighbors, when they built the homes, agreed that they could create any configuration that they wished, then they can do so. The imbanu okanu velo dibru klal bi'achola kolecha laser kafi minik hamakom. He says, and if they built or acquired these homes and didn't speak at all about the rights of each neighbor to make whatever modifications, then bi'achola kolecha laser kafi minik hamakom. That each one can rely on whatever the minhag hamakom is, whatever the accepted custom of that municipality. And if one wishes to depart from the accepted norm of the community, then I can stop you as a neighbor. Because since they never negotiated anything when they first moved in, we assume that they're relying on municipal rules. So sometimes you have a homeowners association that makes certain restrictions and requirements, right? And certainly Dina de Malchusa would require you to abide by that. Condo associations and things like that could be very strict on what kinds of modifications you'd be allowed to make to your condo as far as access to the shared space and so forth. Okay. So I think we've seen enough of the Aruch HaShulchan. The next piece that I wanted to see with you before we go back to the Baruch Omer. Yes, sure. For many years, there was a real tension there. I'm not with all the details, but from what I've heard is that because there was a certain group that wanted to daven in one of the main rooms, and there's another group that wanted that room for their own secular purposes. Yes. And there was always this sort of tension. So what happened in this situation? Well, you get more from people to move in, and that's what's happening. And they take over. About 2 years ago, when I think it was still like we were coming out of COVID, maybe it was 2 or 3 years ago. I don't remember. I think it was 2 years ago. I would go on occasion with Karen to go speak with when the weather would be mild, we'd go out and meet with the whole chevra on Shabbos afternoon in the conservatory. And they were kvetching and complaining about, the neighbors are giving them a hassle. So I said to a group of them, I said, 1 second, you guys are probably the majority by now. Just take over the condo association next election. And guess what? The condo association is run by the Bayit members. It's almost all Bayit members run. Yeah. So if you're not from and you live in that building, forget it. I mean, you're toast. Frank's the president. Yeah. Frank is the main guy that I spoke to. I spoke to Monty Coburn. I said, "Come on, you guys are used to running these major organizations for the Jewish community. You're going to let a few people in your condo push you over, And so, yeah, I guess they took it to heart. Yeah. So anyway, just goes to show you that Even when you retire, you move into the condo, there's always going to be politics that you can take your life skills with you. So, yeah, there you go. Yeah, I know. I know Maury Clients was very involved with that. He consulted with me on that also. Yeah, yeah. Well, they got it, right? Yeah. Okay. So let's take a look. Remember, the reason why we got onto this whole issue is because when we were looking at the Baruch Omer, let's see if I have it. Yeah. Um, so remember, we had been talking about the whole way we got onto this tshuva was Rav Sharaga had asked, was posed the question, we're an apartment building of frum people, and now a guy wants to sublet, he wants to lease his apartment to a non-frum family. Okay. Um, do we have a right to protest? And Rav Sharaga had said, you might be able to makarev this family, so that, don't be so quick to reject them. But when push comes to shove, if you feel that they're a bad influence on the neighborhood and the women are not dressing tzniusdik, you do have a right to protest. But the footnote there then brought, I guess he's a Talmud of Rav Sharaga, he says, Ela dilachoret sarachiyun, the hamavur bisma, lahedja diyachol shutaf limkar chelko afilu ba'oso bayis, gamim shutfo misnage lemechirasa. That as long as I'm doing things in my own house, I do have a right to lease out my property to whomever I wish, and it's none of your business who I end up leasing out my property to. Ve'im kol shekain diyachol echad limkar diraso la'acher. So why can't a person sell his apartment or lease out his apartment to somebody else? V'chein haminag b'chol ha'olam decha she'echad mocher diraso. Me'olam lo shamanu sheshchenav makvim ba'ado. And this is generally the rule in every neighborhood. When you sell your house or you rent out your apartment or you sell your condo, who has the right to say, no, you can't sell to that person? Whoever gave and the neighbors that much power? He says, "V'chein kasav apischei Choshen, the kasav sham shekain kasav hamishpat shalom v'ochiach kein medivrei harama." And he's able to demonstrate the Pischei Choshen writes that as well, and he cites from chapter 4 of the Laws of Neighbors, Siman Lamed Hey. So I just wanted to bring that up for just a moment so that we can see it. Here's the Pischei Choshen. This is chapter 4 from Siman Lamed Hey. I hope I have the right citation. He writes that Shutaf Bekarka Yocholim Korchelko La'acher Shalomi Das Chavero. And that certainly seems to be the position that we saw in the Aruch HaShulchan. A neighbor can't stop me from bringing in as many tenants as I wish, as long as I don't change the configuration of my home. But I can bring in other tenants, even if like an Airbnb operation, and no one can stop me. Ela sheyesh l'shutaf din matzran. The only rights that a neighbor has is he has first rights of refusal. That's what the law of din matzran means, which means that basically, if I own a condo and my next door neighbor says, I'm interested in buying your condo because I want to knock down the wall and expand my condo, he has first dibs. So that if he is able to match the price of any prospective buyer, you have a halachic obligation to sell to your neighbor before you sell to anybody else. But that's the limit of his rights. He doesn't have a right to dictate to whom you may or may not sell. Exactly.
And in this case, should have put a provision not on the wall between two.
No, why not? Why not?
Because now you've converted into one, and if they want to sell it, it might be hard to sell something like.
Well, they're not.
They're not. Yes, she was.
It's not.
Okay, I guess
it's not. There's this.
Okay,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, it is done. It's yeah. I've heard of it being done. Is that what he did?
Like two condos make it for one.
You can.
Yes. There you go. Okay. Now, if we look at the he then points out, he says, Vidavka bekarka, this is only true with real estate. Aval b'shutfis be'esek u'b'mekach u'memkar kvar hivesa b'perak aleph shnir she'eni yachol limkar chelko la'acher. We had seen this, I think, before also, that this is only a law in real estate. But in business, let's say you and I are partners in a business and I want to get out of the business and sell it to somebody else, I don't have a right to force you to take on a different partner. If I want to get out of the business, I either have to buy you out or you have to buy me out. And then, we decide, whoever is the owner then can do with it whatever he wants. Okay, that brings a whole long discussion from the Knesset Agdola. Okay, so in the final analysis, there seems to be a machlokes as far as the extent of a neighbor's rights to dictate to a neighbor what he can and cannot do with his property. And it seems that that we go with a more autonomous position, that as long as you're not modifying the access to a shared area, a construction change, as long as you're not making any alterations, I can't stop who you bring in and out of your private home, even if you want to do an Airbnb operation, as long as there's not going to be any damaging activity that's coming out of your property, and therefore for that reason, the footnote, the annotator was a little bit confused as how Rav Sharaga could say that the neighbors have a right to protest if a non-frum family wants to buy the apartment. And therefore he says, Valkarchach nira de kavanas rabbeinu hagon hamachaber shlita, because of dvar of dafka legabe kirya shenivneta al da'at sheyaguru shamrak anashim shomrei Torah mitzvot. He says, my conclusion, therefore, is that Rav Sharaga was limiting his psak only to a situation where the neighborhood was built initially with the intent of making it a neighborhood that was specifically for Orthodox Jews. V'im kain, and therefore, kol mi shekana sham dira asa kain al da'zeh, and therefore, when anyone initially purchased property in that apartment building or in that neighborhood, it was with the understanding sheyuchal limkor diraso rak lemisha shomer Torah mitzvot, that they can only sell their apartment only to other Orthodox Jews, to other from people. And that's the reason why the neighbors are allowed to restrict who you sell it to, because it's a restricted neighborhood to begin with. It's like Beitar Elite or Beit Shemesh, what is it called? Beit Shemesh Bet or whatever, or certainly Mea Sharim, or one of those neighborhoods where it's from to begin with. It was built initially for that purpose, and therefore it's already built into sort of whether it's expressly written or implicit, it's understood that this is a from neighborhood. And it's as if that when you first bought the apartment, it was an implicit, tacit understanding or condition of your purchase. And therefore, only under those conditions can the neighbors prevent you from selling it to someone who's not from. Especially because the neighbors have a joint ownership of the stairwell and all other of the common areas. But in general, halacha takes a more liberal view to the rights of the neighbors in restricting the rights of the neighbors and giving more autonomy to every individual. Okay? So that's really what I wanted us to see was that this halacha there's a lot of gray area, but at the end of the day, the rights of the individual will, in many cases, if not most cases, will prevail over the rights of the neighbors. When would the rights of an individual not prevail over the rights of the neighbors? When he's a nuisance, when he's making noise, when he brings in when a new tenant comes in and changes the use such that it creates either noise pollution or air pollution or some other kind of nuisance that's going to disrupt the regular living of the other neighbors. So that's why we said many times you can shut down the boutique from operating because it's bringing in additional foot traffic from the outside. That was the previous tshuva, right? And the only exception is if the guy's teaching Torah to students, because then we said since he's doing a mitzvah that is incumbent upon all of the neighbors to participate in, you can't stop him from what he's doing. Okay. All right. So we had just started to talk about this question. Okay, does a person have to pay the utility bill when he's not benefiting from a utility expenditure in the shared area? Ani gar b'koma rishona b'vinyan ben sheish komot. I live on the first floor of a building that has 6 floors. V'lo mishtamesh bo'or shel cheder hamadregot kimat. He says, and I almost never use the light from the stairwell. Me'achar v'yeshli or meharechov, because my area is illuminated by the lights on the street. Ki haknisa ledirati smucha lepetach habinyan, because my apartment the doorway of my apartment is adjacent to the entrance to the street. So should I be billed for the utility bill of the stairwell electricity since I'm not using it? Do I have a right to say to the landlord, I'm not participating, to deduct that from my monthly what is it, the condo owners association fee or whatever it is? Yeah. I don't think this is going to end well for this guy, even though he's asking the shaila. So, yeah. Well, and let me ask you, that's a very good point. In 7601, did the Frum neighbors offer to pay for the modifications? Yeah, I mean, what if there's a part of me that feels that that's a little bit unfair. Like, in other words, it is within the rights of the Frum neighbors to want to get a Shabbos elevator. But let's say it costs $10,000 or $50,000 to make those modifications to an elevator. The Frum neighbors should be the ones to get together and contribute towards it. Why should all the neighbors have to pay for that? That, to me, that's not right. There- there is an added, there's some modification that, unless it was built in initially with that, but it's usually not built in. Uh-huh, so there wasn't any added expense? Uh-huh, yeah, right, right.
But it isn't, at the conservatory, for example, probably isn't inconvenience. Some other one from.
Right. Right, but I would say that's a minor inconvenience. Oh, yeah, right, right. Okay, we'll hold it here. We'll look at this tomorrow. Have a great day.